Police in Kabul have ended a standoff at an international aid organization. All the gunmen were killed. It is the latest in a string of violence and deadly bombings that have gripped the city. At least 41 have died in a 24-hour period. CCTV's Catherine James reports on the uptick in violence in the Afghan capital.
An attack on an international aid organization overnight in Afghanistan's capital is sure to have ramifications on the country at this critical juncture, especially given a spate of attacks on fairly soft targets in the last few weeks, including one on the American University of Afghanistan, and just hours before the international aid organization came under attack, a bombing outside the Ministry of Defense that targeted the first responders by initially setting off a remote-controlled bomb, and then when the first responders gathered, the suicide bomber went in and detonated his suicide vest. The attack on the international aid organization went overnight, starting off with a car bomb around just after 11 p.m. and then ended around 8 a.m. when the Ministry of Interior announced that all the attackers had been killed. However, the capital was still on lockdown for another at least 4 hours, with most of the roads leading to the diplomatic centre of the city were blocked completely. This underlines the sense of unease and instability and distrust in the security that is underway at the moment. The impact of these attacks is difficult to measure, but of course it's left people in quite a bit of shock that both a university and the aid organisation have been targeted. The effect of these attacks on the government has also been felt, with more people calling for resignation of President Ghani, or at least a complete change in the apparatus of the security. Catherine James, CCTV, Kabul.
So what is fueling this recent spate of attacks on soft targets in Kabul? Faisal Pervez is an analyst on South Asia affairs with consulting firm Stratfor. He joins me now from the U.S. state of Texas. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
You know, more than 40 dead in a 24-hour period. What is behind this uptick in violence?
You know, when we look at Afghanistan, when we look at Kabul, we have to realize a couple of things. That first, insurgencies fluctuate. Next month, the U.S. will have been in Afghanistan for 15 years, making this the longest running war in American history. And so I think what you're seeing right now is the Taliban is recognizing the political weaknesses and political vulnerabilities that are facing President Ghani's administration. And so they're trying to launch attacks to capitalize.
Well, as you know, as we mentioned, they did claim responsibility for these attacks. What message, though, is it trying to send, if any, to the Afghan government?
So this is a really good question. I would look at the symbolic nature of their targets. So we know they attacked the American University in Kabul recently, and they're attacking an international aid organization. So the key takeaway here is the Taliban is saying that if you are an outsider, and if you are bringing your presence into this country, you will be under assault. And so I think that because Ghani's administration itself is so overwhelmingly reliant on outside aid, that the Taliban is also giving them a message that so long as you align yourself with outside powers, you can expect this insurgency to continue.
Give us your reading on the Taliban at the moment. Is this group getting stronger?
Yeah, the Taliban, a couple things to mention here are that, number one, this organization first came onto the scene back in 1994. And since then, the Taliban that we see today is much more diffuse, much more decentralized, and it's a different organization. But nonetheless, we still see that since the beginning of the US-led invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, the Taliban have actually gained more territory than at any time since that point. So it is clear that their tactics and their strategy is working. And I might add that the other side of the coin here is actually the weakness of the government. Certainly the insurgency itself has its own endurance, but it's also because the current government of Afghanistan is so weak that the insurgency is able to capitalize and to launch and sustain these attacks.
So what does that say then about security in Kabul and in other parts of the country? Do you think we can expect to see more attacks like what we've seen in the last 24 hours?
Unfortunately, the answer to that question is probably yes. And the reason being is that because we have seen such uh, a difficulty in reconciliation between President Ghani and the chief executive Abdullah, that their lack of coordinating their energies and their efforts to really build and bolster the Afghan National Security Forces creates this security vulnerability, which is going to allow the Taliban to attack. And so, yeah, I do think that as we move on into the winter months, that we're going to continue to see this stream of attacks.
All right, Fazil Pervez, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining us from Texas.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much.